Okay, so let's try to analyze what we did earlier and derive some general ideas, some general principles that we can use in every situation to create awesome arguments, right? So what we did earlier is we looked at the different options in which you had to choose different restaurants. Then we chose, based on things that we knew were true, we analyzed those options and led towards a conclusion that we wanted, right? So usually it works in reverse, because I decide first that I want to go to restaurant A, maybe. And then I look for reasons which I can use to persuade everyone to go to restaurant A. The reasons that I choose to persuade everyone should be reasons that can apply to everyone. So, which is why I choose something that everybody generally agrees is true, right? So we break those things down into, and I think they're generally three parts, okay? Arguments have a premise, a hypothesis, and a conclusion. And they're connected to each other, leading towards that conclusion, right? Where you start from generally doesn't have that much of an impact, but I think it's a little bit clearer to start from the premise. So the premise here is something that is true. It's a description, it's a fact, it's an observation. It's something that people generally believe is true. For example, the statement, the breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? People generally believe that's true. I mean, there is some science that will back that up, but if you tell that to people even without some scientific theory, and if you're not a scientist, it's difficult for people to disagree with you. They'll say, yeah, you're probably right. Breakfast is the most important meal. Well, it's one of the most important meals, it's a very important meal of the day, okay? So that things like that make the premise, right? From the premise, the hypothesis is something that derives or understands or analyzes an aspect of that premise, to lead towards your conclusion. So it is a way you interpret the premise. You stand on top of the premise. Because this thing is true, therefore I can say this. And because I can say this, I have my conclusion. Okay? So if I'm trying to persuade you, for example, that you should eat eggs at breakfast because I'm an eggs salesman. I have a farm with many chickens and they all lay eggs and I need to sell as many eggs as possible. So my conclusion is that you should eat eggs in the morning. Well, because I'm an egg salesman, I think you should eat eggs all the time, but I'm trying to get you to eat more eggs in the morning. Okay? So I start from the premise that the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. People generally agree. And then I say, look, eggs give you so much nutrition, there's energy, there's protein, it's all the vitamins and nutrition you need to have a very successful day. Because it's an important meal, you need to have all these proteins and these vitamins and minerals, right? Now, some part of that is true, some part of that is, maybe a little bit hyperbole, maybe a little bit of exaggeration. Eggs are not the perfect food, but I'm trying to build up on eggs, right? I'm trying to sell it, I'm trying to make it out to be an awesome thing. So I'm not lying, I'm selling you eggs, right? And the conclusion therefore is, because eggs are awesome, and because breakfast is important, you should eat eggs. Ta-da! That makes an argument, okay? So you start from a premise, something that people generally believe, you use a hypothesis and analysis of that to lead towards a conclusion. You can start with a conclusion too, very often. So if you have a topic or an argument, you have an objective. So I need to sell this product. I need to persuade my boss to give me time off. I need to persuade my teacher to allow me to go to the bathroom. I need to persuade my friends to eat in this restaurant. That's my conclusion. Then under my conclusion, maybe there's a more specific conclusion. So to persuade my friends to go to this restaurant, I'm going to persuade them that the food in this restaurant is great. Okay? So that's my conclusion, to persuade that food in the restaurant is great. I will use a premise and a hypothesis, a premise that everybody agrees. So I'm going to say, this kind of food, we haven't had this type of food, maybe, I don't know, sashimi or sushi in a very long time. And we all know, it's delicious at this time of year. And the places near the markets serve the best sashimi, and that restaurant is near the market, and this restaurant therefore has the best sashimi. So we should go there to have some of this great sashimi, right? So I use things which people generally agree with, interpret them, and put some my analysis and logic on top of those things to lead to my conclusion, okay? There are a few more examples, right? So if you look through the slides, Korea, on the table on the slide, the premise is that Korea doesn't have many natural resources. Certainly most people will agree. Hypothesis, Korea needs to invest more in human resource and IT. Conclusion, strong IT and human resource ensures Korea's economic success. The conclusion is something that people want. It's the goal which you're trying to lead to. The premise is something that most people agree with, and the hypothesis connects that, right? So look through those other examples, and more importantly, try to create some examples on your own. What you can also do is try to change some of those things. Now these things are interconnected, but they're also independent, okay? So from one premise, I can use a different hypothesis and maybe lead to the same conclusion, or maybe lead to a different conclusion. Or I can have one conclusion that comes from the same hypothesis using a different premise, or a different hypothesis from a different premise. Okay, so an interesting exercise would be to choose, if you're in a group of individuals, choose one premise and try to create different hypotheses and conclusions, or one premise and one conclusion, and then try to fill in as many different hypotheses as you can, right? That's step one. And then compare those things and choose which one is the most effective. Okay, because sometimes you can use multiple hypotheses to lead to the same hypothesize, well, many different ways of logically reasoning something to lead to the same conclusion, right? And that creates, and that helps you decide what is the most effective way to persuade someone and what is really strong argumentation, all right? Good, so that's argumentation, logic. What we're going to look at next is the structure of an argument. Now it's slightly different from this. So this is also a structure. And this is also a shape. And when you're presenting this in a debate, you can present it this way, logically, because this is a logical way to talk about it. But it's often not a good idea to start your discussion maybe from the premise, or to get people to remember this, because you can have one premise that can lead to many different conclusions, right? Your conclusion is the most important thing, which you want people to remember, because this is what you're persuading people about. So I'm going to give you a different structure of an argument. I'm going to magically put it on the board now.